Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite makeup products, and these are the YSL Eyeshadow Quads. And I actually have all 11 of these quads that are currently available on the market. So in this video what I'm going to be doing is showing you each of these quads individually. So I will be putting these on using natural light and up close so that you can really see how they are behaving and how they are looking on me, and also how they're looking in the context of a full makeup look. And of the 4 shades that were just released, I do have all 4 of these. So these are called Over Dore, Over Brun, Over Noir, and Over Orange. And then I also have this one, which was released in Europe last year, but which just became available on the YSL site here in the US. And this is a blue palette that I especially like, actually, and this is called Palmeraie Skies. And the thing that I really like about these YSL eyeshadow palettes is that I feel like they are really unusual in terms of how well they go on my eyes and how blendable they are and how easily I can make them work for me. So in general, I tend to have had really problematic experiences with many eyeshadow palettes, either because they are not pigmented enough or because they are too pigmented and then they don't blend very easily. And then of course some do have ingredients in them that irritate my eyes. And in the case of these palettes, I think that they perform really spectacularly well on all of these aspects. So they have really interesting color stories, but they are very blendable, and I have been able to make all of them work on my very fair complexion. So first, a little bit of information about me. I'm 59 years old and I have dry and sensitive skin. And over the past 3 years, I've tried more than 1,000 makeup products. And my goal in doing all of this is to try to find products that, one, don't irritate my skin, and also that perform well for me, particularly in the context of my skin acquiring more wrinkles and other kinds of issues that make some products not look very good on me. And one thing that I have found is that there are certain ingredients that always do irritate my sensitive skin. And I know that those tend to be very irritating for many other people as well. So I just don't talk about products with those ingredients on this channel. And one more issue for me is that I'm not a professional makeup artist, and I am looking to spend only 5 or 10 minutes a day on my makeup. So what I'm really looking for are products that perform especially well, that go on really fast, that don't get messed up. And I also do like a good amount of variety in my makeup. I'm not really necessarily interested in wearing all of the same products every day forever. And so therefore I'm really looking for products that behave particularly well and that I can count on even if I haven't used them that many times in the past. Now, YSL Beauty is a company that was purchased by L'Oreal in 2008, and L'Oreal also owns Armani, and so Armani is kind of a sister company to YSL Beauty. And what I will say is that until sometime last year, there were almost no products from either Armani or YSL Beauty that I was able to use, because all of them did include ingredients that were really problematic for me. But as of last year, I think things have changed a lot at both of these companies, and that they have been introducing some products that I have been able to use. So for YSL, some of their products do still have fragrance in them. I think that all of their lip products do still have fragrance in them. And it also is the case that their new powder compact, that one does have fragrance in it. But there are a few products from YSL that I have been able to use. So for instance, they introduced last year this mascara, which is called Lash Clash. And this is a mascara that's kind of on the heavy side in terms of creating a fairly full lash look, which is not necessarily what I'm looking for. But in terms of how it performs, I think it has been fine for me. It has a pretty good ingredient list, and I haven't found it to be irritating. And I do think that once I get this on my eyelashes, that it has worked pretty well, and I am wearing that today. And then in addition, they just released a line of bronzers, and I have found these to be very nice bronzers also. They are matte, and so I am able to use them to make my face look a little bit darker and more tanned. And I have 2 different shades of these. 01 is really the lightest bronzer that I've seen on the market, and I do really like that one, particularly when I'm just looking for a little bit of a tan. And then 02 has worked for me pretty well too. But it certainly is the case that I am the most enthusiastic about these eyeshadow quads, and I think that really these are my favorite eyeshadow quads on the market, or maybe my favorite powder eyeshadows, and that they are much different than really all of the other powder eyeshadows on the market, and that they have worked for me really, really well, and that is why I've bought all of them. Now, as I say, I've had a lot of trouble with a lot of different eyeshadows in the past, so many of them do include ingredients that have been problematic for me, like aluminum powder or Teflon, and then in a lot of cases they just don't perform all that well, so they are more difficult to put on my eyes. They tend not to blend all that well. They might have color stories that are much too pigmented for me, or that just don't seem to be flattering to me. And especially, I think, is the blendability issue. So I found in a lot of cases that when I put eyeshadows on my eyes, that unless I'm very, very careful with it, they tend to go on very pigmented, and then it's hard for me to blend them together to make a nice look. And I think that with these shadows, it has been really surprising to me how I can just kind of throw these on really fast and spend, just a couple minutes just putting the basics on and then just blend them a little bit. And they always look really nice because they do blend together so easily. So I think that has made a really big difference for me in terms of my interest in wearing eyeshadows that are powder eyeshadows at all. And I also think it's the case that these color combinations that they have are very nice. With the exception of that blue one, all of these are fairly neutral. And yet I think that they are interesting enough for me to want to wear on a regular basis. And they also are kind of muted enough that I can wear them on a regular basis. So I don't feel like I need to save them up for a special occasion, and I don't feel like if I'm just going out during the day that I need to be concerned about whether they're too bright or too dark or too glittery. I think that all of them work really, really well for me, and for the more of a subtle type of a look that I am trying to achieve. And I do think it's the case that as I get older, I'm kind of using a strategy where I want to be using some more interesting colors on my face. I feel like if I can draw some more attention upward, that people will focus more on my eyes and on my eyeshadow look than they do on the wrinkles that might be appearing on other parts of my face. And I think that for that, these eyeshadows are really, really nice because they do provide a little bit of a special type of a look. I do think that they are really pretty, and that especially if I use them to coordinate with things that I'm wearing, they look fairly sophisticated and attractive without looking garish or like I'm trying to be younger than I actually am. And another thing that I will say about these eyeshadows is that I kind of am feeling that right now a really elaborate eyeshadow look where people are obviously using a lot of different colors, that is not quite as much in style as it used to be. Now for young people, some of them are not wearing eyeshadow at all, or they may be wearing just one color of eyeshadow. And what I feel like with these YSL quads is that if I put all four even of the colors in a quad on my eyes, that these blend together so easily that I don't feel like it's quite so noticeable that I'm wearing multiple colors on my eyes, and it looks more just like a quick one and done type of a shadow that is particularly pretty. And I think that they're a lot more sophisticated than almost all the one and done shadows that are on the market when I do it like that, because you do get the depth of color from the different kinds of shadows. But in terms of how it looks, I think that these are looking really nice on me. And in general, I do really like eyeshadow quads because I feel like some of the decisions have already been made for me, and that the colors that they are using, that they are going to look nice together, hopefully, and also that they're not taking up a lot of room. And so I feel like I would never use more than one quad at once, so I'm not real concerned about whether there's duplication across quads. I'm really looking at what kind of look I'm going to be getting from that particular quad. And I have yet to be very disappointed with any of these. I think that they are looking very nice. So in terms of the formulas, I feel like the formulas and how these eyeshadows are made is quite different than is the case with any of the other eyeshadows that I have seen that have been on the market. And one thing about them is that they are very creamy. They do have a lot of oils in them, so they are noted as having coffee seed oil and almond oil, and also prickly pear extract, and I think that that is part of why they are all so creamy and easy to blend. It also is the case, and I found this out to be a bit of a surprise. When I first got this palette, this particular part of it was not stuck in there entirely, and so it fell on the floor, and then one of these pieces of eyeshadow fell out, and I was kind of horrified. And when I looked at it, it actually is not in a metal pan at all. And the other thing that I did find is that when that fell out of the palette, that it did fall apart a little bit, but that I was able to take the pieces and just kind of easily press them with my fingers back into the pan, and that they all really just stuck together, and that it became totally usable again. So I think that that's a very unusual formula. I've never seen anything like that with any other eyeshadow formulas before. So I think that this is part of why they've been so easy for me to blend and so easy for me to wear, because they do have the durability of a powder shadow. They are quite pigmented, and they do stay on the eyes, and once I get them on my eyes, I do think that they stay in place for really the whole day, and that they stay fresh looking. But it also is the case that they have a really, really creamy type of an element to them that makes them very blendable. And they all do have a combination of some shimmers and some mattes. Some of them are fairly matte, but they are still really, really creamy. And then some of them are shimmery, but I haven't found any of them to be so glittery that I wouldn't be able to wear them really on any occasion at all. So several months ago, I did a video on the first two of these palettes that I purchased, which were Stora Dolls and Kasbah Spices. And at the time, I did not understand that these actually do have talc in them. And the reason for that is because when I looked at the ingredient lists that were on both the YSL website and also the Sephora website, and really all the other websites that I could find, they only listed the ingredients for the first shade in the palette, and they didn't list any of the ingredients for the other shades. And so finally I did take a good look at the box for a few of these shades, and I realized that they do actually have talc in them in some of the shades. Now, I don't consider that to be an issue for me. I think that as long as I've been using talc in high-end eyeshadow palettes at least, I haven't found that to be irritating. Now, almost always when I am putting on a powder eyeshadow, I will put down some kind of a primer underneath it, and I did that for these as well. So what I used for these looks was the Stay Slip Tint Concealer, and this is a water-based concealer with a little doe foot. And the reason that I like this, I think that it does put a nice surface on my eyes where the shadows can stick to it a little more easily. And I also think that it will protect my eyes from the shadows if they do have any problematic ingredients in them, possibly, as long as they're not too problematic. And it also is the case that it will cover over some of the darkness that has emerged on my eyes as I've gotten older. And there are a couple of different concealers I do like for that purpose. I like the Kosas one, and I like the House Labs one, and I think that this same one is very nice. But in general, I haven't really found these eyeshadows from YSL to be problematic, even on the times that I have put them directly on my eyelids. I just don't feel like they are really irritating. And I think that in terms of the ingredient list, they actually look quite good to me. A few of them do have some colorants in them, and so conceivably for some people, the ones that have, particularly I would think the yellow number 5, that those could be problematic. Carmine is from Beetles, so that would make it a non-vegan type of a product. But in general, I think that the ingredient lists are really, really clean in these. They don't have any fragrance, they don't have any aluminum powder, they don't have a lot of different colorants in them. And in general, I have been perfectly fine with them, and I haven't been finding them irritating. And in terms of the usage life, they are stated as having a 24-month usage life after you start using them. So what I have found with these, because they are so soft, is that they look like they're not in that great of shape now. They tend to be looking a little bit crumbly and a little bit messy, but in terms of how they are holding up and performing for my eyes, I don't feel like they've changed at all since I've gotten them. And some of them I've had for almost a year. Now, in terms of the downsides of these palettes, I would say that for me it really has to do with the packaging for the product rather than for the product itself. So these are in fairly large containers considering how small the eyeshadows themselves are, and they are fairly thick, and it has this big YSL on the front of it, and then it has this imitation leather, which is supposed to look like a YSL purse. And I think that this is sort of the epitome of what I would suggest is sort of like loud luxury. So generally speaking, I am looking for something that is really sophisticated, that doesn't have a big logo on it, and this is kind of the opposite of that, and I'm not that crazy about the imitation leather, and that there is a lot of plastic that's obvious on the inside of this, and that in general I just don't find it to be a product that I'm feeling really good about. But some people really love this packaging and think that it's really wonderful, and so it really depends on what you're looking for in an eyeshadow, I think. I think the other issue that I have with it is that this is particularly large and particularly not recyclable at all, and that's a little bit bothersome to me as well. I think that at minimum that there should be refills that you could put in here, or that you could just buy one of these palettes and then put the refill on the inside and pay a little bit less money. Now the other thing is that they seem to be at least twice as large as they would need to be in terms of how thick they are, and in terms of this big space down here that they are allowing you to put these little brushes. So some of these luxury beauty companies now, they are including these little travel brushes in there, and they're a lot fancier than the travel brushes used to be. So in this one, they have one that's like a brush, and it actually does have a tip on it that's like a whole brush. And then there's this one which has two sponge tips on it. And so this takes up a really big chunk of this container, and I don't like having these brushes in here at all. They tend to always fall on the floor when I take the palette out, and so I've just taken all of the brushes out of all the palettes and put them all in a little bag, and I don't think that I'll probably ever be using these. Now I do think that they're better than the little applicators that you used to get in eyeshadows used to be, but they're still not ones that I would be using, and I think that because of the spot for that, this is just a much bigger and bulkier and kind of not very elegant type of container. But again, I'm very much in disagreement with a lot of people. A lot of people love this container. Now the other thing that happened is that in terms of the first batch of the products, that a lot of them, this piece of it was not glued in properly, and so it just would fall out. And in some cases, as happened with me, the eyeshadows would get damaged. And I think that they seem to have repaired that. I haven't had that issue with any of the newer colors. So if you buy one of the older colors and it does happen to be an older stock, then you may find that you need to either glue that into the container, or in my case, I took a piece of electrician's tape and I rolled it inside out and just stuck it in there and then stuck the palette in there, and that has worked out okay for me. And then the other thing that I didn't really realize until I took a bunch of pictures of the palettes is how messy they look even after the first time that I use it. So because they are so soft, they do kick up a little bit of fallout in terms of not things that go up in the air so much, but just they get around the corners of the palette, and they definitely look used after I use it just one time. And so if you're looking for a palette to look really pretty and clean and elegant and not like it's a great big mess, then this might make you kind of frustrated, because I do think that you'd have to thoroughly clean it, including this little space in between all of these shadows, in order to get that kind of look. But I don't intend to do that at all. I'm not really that concerned about how it looks. I'm really only purchasing makeup for how it performs. And then another thing before I show you the eyeshadow footage going on, I will talk just briefly about how I tend to put on eyeshadows. I tend to start off by putting a kind of a neutral type of a color all over my eyelids that are the movable part, and then up a little bit further. And I think that that makes the eyes look a little bit less hooded, and it creates a look where you can actually see that color. And then I will pick a second color that's either a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, and I will put this on the outer corners of my eyes, maybe on the outer third, just to give it a little bit of depth and dimension. And then usually if there's an appropriate shade that is a lot darker, so like a dark blue or a dark gray or often a dark brown, that I will use that more as like an eyeliner. So I will put it right along my upper lash line as close to my lashes as I can. And then in some cases, depending on what color it is, I will put a little bit of this below my eyes as well and in my bottom lashes. And then typically an eyeshadow palette will have a really shimmery type of a shade in it. And for that one, what I tend to do is to just put a little bit of that shimmery shade sort of like all over the entire look so that it gives a little bit of dimension and it doesn't look like it's just all shimmer and no color, that there is some kind of a depth and sort of a sophistication to it. And that it doesn't look real shimmery because I'm just putting a very small amount of it on, but it does give it some interest value. And then what I will do at the end is to just blend all of these colors together so that they don't look like they're all these separate colors, but they look like more like they're a one and done shadow, but with some natural dimension from my eyes in them. And in the picture that I'm putting here, you know, I would probably not use two colors that are this distinct in terms of creating an eyeshadow look like this. But I think that this is a good picture to look at because it gives a better sense of what these actually look like and that you can see where the different colors are going in this particular person's opinion. And so what I'm looking for in an eyeshadow quad is that it have some colors in it that I can use as sort of a base color that are more of a soft matte or a satin type of a shade that I can use all over my movable part of my eyes as the base, and that they have a dark shade in there that's not too reddish that I can use as an eyeliner, and that they have some kind of a shimmery type of a color in them. So I will say that for most of the YSL quads that they are set up this way, that they do have this kind of a color variety. In some cases, they don't have any kind of dark shade that is appropriate for use as an eyeliner, and so I have had to resort to using an eyeliner. But in general, I do think that most of the eyeshadow quads from YSL have been usable for me in that way. So one more thing before I show you each of these quads is why they have the names that they do. So for the first 8 quads that were released, they all have place names in them. And what I realized is that these were all places where Yves Saint Laurent spent considerable amounts of time during his life. And most of them are related to either Algeria, where he grew up, or Marrakesh, where he had a house when he was older. And then for the most recent releases, they use the word over, which seems to be an English word, and then the color words that are in French, such as Over Orange. And I'm not quite sure what that means, so if you have any ideas, then please let me know. But in any case, for the first one, we have the Over Noir one, and this one has a black color as a featured color, I guess. And then that is quite a dark color, and I've used it as an eyeliner in the look that I did. And then the other colors that we have here, we have one that is just a very slightly shimmery, which is a taupe type of a color with just a little bit of a lean towards cool, so it looks tiny little bit lavender to me, but it really is quite a fairly neutral taupe that I really think is very wearable by me. And then there is a sort of a steel gray that does have a little bit of a shimmer in it. And then there is a very, very shimmery, slightly sparkly gray shade that's very silvery. And my feeling about this palette is that, first of all, I don't generally lean towards black shades and towards gray shades, that those tend to feel a little bit foreign to my complexion. But I'm glad that I decided to try this one anyway, because I do think it was really wearable by me. Now, usually what happens when I get into the grays is that they tend to be very pigmented, and then they go on really dark, and that it's hard to blend them. But in this case, I do think it is so blendable that I was able to wear this and to make a fairly nice look fairly easily. I do think that this taupe shade in here does help a little bit. This reminds me a little bit of the Lisa Eldridge Vega palette, which I've always been a little bit interested in, but that one does have 2 shades in it that I wouldn't be able to use because they have aluminum powder in it, whereas this one, of course, doesn't have any aluminum powder at all. And in general, what I would say about this particular quad is that I think it's more suited towards a type of a formal occasion, and that would be what I would be most inclined to use this for. So for instance, if I were going to a formal event and if I were wearing a long black dress, maybe one that's velvet or maybe one that's a bright red color, that might be a really, really nice eyeshadow palette to use with a dress like that. For everyday looks, I'm not quite sure that this is something that I will be reaching for very often. I do think it's a little bit dramatic for me. Some people I think would do really well with this on an everyday basis. But I do think it's a beautiful palette, and it is much more wearable than I thought that it would be. And if I did go to a special event like that, then this would be the palette that I would use. And that's why I put on some red lipstick with this, because I think if I were wearing this palette along with the red lipstick and some kind of a red dress, I think that could be really stunning. And there is one section in this footage where I managed to get a big blob of this black shadow up near my eyebrow, and it's hard to sometimes see what's going on by looking at the camera monitor, but when I noticed it, I was able to blend that out really easily without having to go and wash my face. And I think it's just because these eyeshadows are so easily malleable that it is a lot easier to remove them than it is with a typical powder eyeshadow. And then the next one that I have is called Over Orange, and this one is number 810, and this is actually the eyeshadow that I put on my eyes today. So usually I would not think that I could wear a palette like this with this bright color orange on a regular basis, but I think it's actually been working for me well, and if I'm wearing especially any clothing with any orange in it at all, this actually goes on really nicely and kind of coordinates really well and gives a little bit of extra interest value just because these shadows are so blendable. So what we have here in this palette, there's actually a very bright red-orange type of a color that looks, when I swatch it, it looks really almost like a Crayola crayon type of an orange red. But when I put it on my eyes, it looks much softer. And then, of course, when I blend it in, I think that it looks perfectly nice and that it does create a really pretty look. And then there's also in this palette a color that mostly looks beige in the pan, but I do think it has a very small amount of an orange lean to it. So I think it does coordinate really well with this orange shade. And then there also is a shade that's much more brown and that looks almost like it's a eyeliner type shade in the pan. And I do feel like I can put it on the top of my eyes as an eyeliner, but I think it's reddish enough that when I put it on underneath my eyes that it really goes too reddish and it looks like I have allergies or that I'm not doing very well in terms of feeling good. So in the video footage, I did try putting that on under my eyes first. That was actually the first time that I used this palette. And then eventually I put on some more of a straightforward brown eyeliner instead of that, and I think that worked a lot better. And that if, as I did today, if I line my eyes with a more of a neutral brown eyeliner pencil and I use some neutral brown mascara, that seems to go really nicely with the orange. And then there's also a shade in here that has just a little bit of sort of an orange sherbet type of a color to it, but that is very shimmery, and so I just put a little bit of that on the top of this, and then, as I often do, I just blended it all together with the goal that it look more like it's just a one and done shade. And I think that these four shades do work really, really well together, and that when I blend them together, I feel like the orange is much more flattering than I would imagine that it would be on my face, especially if I am wearing some kind of clothing that has a bit of orange in it. And what I actually did today was to use that darkest shade. I actually used that all over my whole eyelids, and then I put that orange shade just in the outer corners, and I think that actually worked really nicely. So I think that dark shade is more usable than you might think, but that you just want to avoid using that as an eyeliner because it can look a little too reddish, at least on my skin. And then the third quad that we have is called Over Brun. And this is basically 4 different caramel type shades. So what we have here is, there is one that is very, very shimmery that is up here that I use as a topper. But then I also have 2 shades that are just somewhat shimmery that are kind of in the middle. We have one that is more of like a taupe shade with a little bit of a warm lean to it. And then there's one that's a little bit darker that is almost like a sepia type shade. And then there's one that's a bit darker that is more of like a medium brown, but again with a little bit of a warm lean to it, a very slight amount. And then the darker shade is actually pretty neutral. And so this is a shade that I feel I can use quite easily as an eyeliner just because it does go so cool and it's not going to make anyone think that I have a eye allergy. And I would say that in general, as eyeshadows go, that caramel colors like this tend to be the most natural for me, and that when I use these always do reliably look very nice and very at home on my eyes, and that I can really wear it with almost anything and that it will look very pretty. And so I think that this is definitely an eyeshadow that I could use every day and that I can get a lot of use out of, and I've been very happy with it so far. But it is the case that I have other eyeshadows that give me kind of the same look as this one. So I would say that, for instance, the Lisa Eldridge Cinnabar palette, I'm not sure if I like those formulas quite as much as this one, but that palette has worked for really, really well for me. And so I think that for a lot of people, this is a more of a basic type of a palette that you might be able to use very often, but it may not be as distinctive as some of the other ones like the orange one or the black one. And then of the new quads, the other one is called Over Dore. Dore means gold in French. And this one has 2 shades that are more on the brownish side, and then it has 2 that are leaning gold. So I think the most unusual shade in this palette is this one at the bottom, which is a pretty hefty gold color. It's a little bit shimmery, obviously, but it also is fairly pigmented, and so you can use this more as like an overall color on your movable eyes, which I've done here. And I think that this particular shade of gold, it has just a teeny little bit of a green lean to it. So it doesn't look obviously green, but it's moving a little bit in that direction. And I think that that's actually a really good shade for me, and it is a little bit different than the greens that you might often see. So for instance, I actually do have the Natasha Denona Golden Palette, and I've been playing with that one. And I think that this one is actually a little bit different than anything that is in that Natasha Denona palette. And I think that on my complexion anyway, and depending on what I'm wearing, I think this can be very attractive. Then in this case, there's also 2 shades of neutral type browns. There is one of them that is a kind of a medium taupe type color. It's leaning a little bit darker, and it has just a little bit of grayishness to it. So I think that that goes very easily with these greenish yellow gold shades. And then there is one that is a fairly neutral brown and dark, so I think that that one does work fairly well and fairly easily as an eyeliner for me. And then the one that is in the upper left-hand corner, that is a gold shade, and it is fairly transparent, so you're just getting a few little sparkles of gold, so you can put this on top of another shade. So for instance, if what you wanted to do is to use one of those brown shades as the main shade and then just use a tiny little bit of a shimmer over it, then you could certainly do that really easily with this palette. Now, I would not say that I have worn gold eyeshadow that much in the past. I do have one from Pat McGrath that I talked about in one of my other videos, and I did enjoy that particular palette. But in general, I haven't worn gold eyeshadows a lot in my life, but I do think that these are really pretty colors, and I think that it might be worth doing a video at some point to compare this to the Natasha Denona Golden palette and also to that Pat McGrath palette, because I think that they are all quite different from one another, even though they are both giving more of that golden type of look to them. And although I think I would be more inclined to wear a golden type palette for like holidays or special events, I think you can kind of get away with it in the summer too. I think that it's kind of reflective of the sunshine, and that it can go nicely with a lot of different outfits even during the day, during the summer months especially. And then the next quad is called Palmeraie Skies, and this is number 900, and this is a blue palette, so it's the only palette that they have released so far that really has really strikingly bright colors to it. And I was kind of excited about this when I first saw it. It might be available at some point because I am kind of a fan of blue eyeshadows depending on how they are used. And this was released in France or maybe other countries in Europe last year, but it hasn't really been released in the US until just a couple of weeks ago, and now it has appeared on the YSL website, and I really haven't seen very many people talk about it at all. And I think that's too bad because I think it's really gorgeous and I really have enjoyed it since I've gotten it. So I originally filmed this video footage for a Get Ready With Me where I was talking while I was putting on my makeup. But then when I found out that these new palettes were coming out, I just thought that I would put all of these palettes together in one video. And so rather than reshooting that footage, because I did put a lot of stuff on my eyes and then take it off, I just inserted the part with me talking in here. So I hope that that is not too distracting to you. Now, Palmeraie means a palm grove in French, and the most famous palm grove is in outside of Marrakesh in Morocco, and this is again where Yves Saint Laurent had a house with his partner, and so he spent a lot of time there, and so I think that that is what this is named after. So the colors are supposed to be based on the colors of the sky and I think the ocean. So the shade that I started with for this is the one that is the lighter blue shade, and I put this all over my entire movable eyelids and then up a little bit higher. And I think this is a really pretty color. I think it is a fairly wearable color. It has just a little bit of a purplishness to it. And I think that it is one that definitely is blue, and that if I use it by itself, I think it's wearable. And I think that especially as long as I'm reflecting a color that is in my clothing, I think that it is really, really pretty. And I really wouldn't have thought that I could wear blue eyeshadow, but so far I seem to be really successful with it depending on exactly what the shade is. I do think it's really pretty. And then over the top of that, I just put a little bit of that really sheer greenish blue. It's almost like a sea green type of a color. And I think that rather than having it all be blue, having a little bit of that shimmery sea green, it gives it a little bit more of a complex color to it so that it is not quite as easily describable as a blue eyeshadow, and it kind of mutes it out a little bit and just makes it a little bit more interesting looking. And then in general, I have found that dark blue eyeshadow can work really, really well for me as an eyeliner. And I think that the really, really dark blue in this little quad makes it into a very, very nice eyeliner as well. And I think the color in this palette that is the most of a statement type color is this marine type blue. So I did try putting this on both in terms of combination with the other colors, and then I put on a little bit more toward the end of this footage so that you could see what it looks like if I were more just wearing it on its own or as the dominant color. And I do think that this is a strong color, but I don't think it looks bad on my eyes. It kind of reminds me of how people used to wear their eyeshadow back in the 1970s, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's certainly a bright color, but I don't think it's unattractive, at least on me. And I think especially if I'm wearing an outfit that has some blue in it and that I'm just trying to do something that's a little bit more fun or a little bit more retro, I think that's actually a really nice color. So for the mascara with this look, I did use some brown mascara. I felt like this was such a distinctive look already that I thought that maybe a brown mascara would calm it down a little bit rather than trying to emphasize it more with the black mascara. And I think that actually worked pretty well. And then in terms of lipstick, I picked out one from Merit that is part of their new matte line. And this is in the shade Antibes. And I thought that this would kind of maybe coordinate with the sort of beachy look of the eyeshadows. And I kind of think that they actually do look kind of nice together. And so now let's move into some of the older quads. And so the first one that I have here is called Medina Glow. Now this palette definitely has shades that are all on the rosy side or the pink side, and they all have slight amounts of glow to them or more than slight amounts of glow. And I'm not always that comfortable with pink myself. I think that I feel very comfortable with peach shades. I feel very comfortable with brown shades or green shades or really even blue shades, but when we get into the pinks and the rosy type colors, I feel a little bit less comfortable. But despite that fact, I do think that this particular quad has worked really, really well for me, and that it has done a really nice job of blending together and creating a look that I think is festive and a little bit summery or a little bit spring-like, and that I think that if I were wearing especially the right clothing, that it does work really well for me. So what we have is a sort of a medium clay-colored pink that I used kind of as a base, and then there is a color that is a little bit more almost like a burgundy type of a color, leaning in that direction. And I use that as a accent type of a color. I think that that would not work very well at all if I put any of it under my eyes. I think it would be way too red, but I think that if I stick with putting it on my eyelids and then I use an eyeliner with it, I think that it actually has looked kind of nice. And then there are two colors that are more shimmery. One is a kind of a brownish pink color that I think is super pretty, and I do like that one a lot. And then there's one that's more of a taupe type color that is also quite shimmery. And I think that if I just kind of put these on and then make sure that I blend them all together, I think that it did create a really, really pretty look. But I did use a brown eyeliner, and I think that the brown eyeliner is really key here to try to blend it all together, because I think that pink and brown is a really nice combination, and that it does make the statement that this is actually a look that I'm going for on my eyes, and not that my eyes have a problem. And then the next quad that we have is called Spontini Lilies, and this is shade 600, and this is a quad that seems to focus on peach colors, and they are very, very pale, so they are not probably going to work all that well for people that have darker skin tones. And they are primarily more on the matte side, with just maybe one of the shades having a little bit of shimmer in them. But actually they're quite an understated look, in my opinion. So in this palette, again, they're pretty much leaning towards peachy type of shades, or peachy brown type shades. So there's one that's a kind of a clay color that has a pinkish brown type of a color to it. And then there's one that's a little bit darker, but that seems sort of similar to that. And then there's one that's more of a taupe type color, but with a little bit of a pinky brown lean to it. And then there's one that's sort of more of a neutral type of a taupe, but with a little bit of shimmer in it. And I would say that this is kind of reminding me of the shade of blush from NARS that is called Sex Appeal, that is designed really for very light skin tones. And so therefore, if you're looking for something that's really neutral, and if you do have a light skin tone and you want something that's going to be very delicate looking, that this could be a nice thing to do. And when I first put this on my own eyes in this video footage, when I'm looking at it and saying, gee, there's not much to it, is there? But I feel like when I went ahead and added some solid brown eyeliner and some solid mascara to it, then I think that it starts to look like it is much more interesting looking, and that it's supposed to be subtle like that, and that it's kind of delicate and pretty, but at the same time that it's actually noticeable. And then when I added a little bit of sort of peachy type of a lipstick and a peachy type of a blush, I think it's a very pretty peach type color vibe to it that I think is very nice, especially for the summer months, and that I feel like I like this finished look enough that I think I'm going to try wearing this more often, because I think that it's something that you can wear every day and that does just look natural and kind of fresh. And then the next quad is 200, and this is called, I think it's pronounced Gueliz Dream, and this is based on a neighborhood that is in Marrakesh. And so again, we have these reddish brown type of colors. They are saying in the description that I've read in certain places that this is supposed to be a fairly neutral palette, but I think that there is a distinctly reddish tone to it. So it's more like brownish reds rather than something that's actually neutral. And some of these colors are pretty dark in terms of the reddishness that's available in them. So there is one here that is sort of a medium brownish color with a little bit of a reddishness to it that is more on the matte side. And then there is another one that is considerably more red. It's much more like a rosy type of a color. And it is, again, a matte type of a color. And it's a little bit muted out. There is a definite brownishness to it. But there's definitely red in that color. And then there's one that, at first I thought that I could use it as an eyeliner, but it definitely has a lot of reddishness to it also. So I really need to keep this one just on the top lid and not put it underneath my eyes. And then there's one in here that's a kind of a neutral gold. And I think that it makes a really pretty look, and when I blend it together, it looks more neutral than I would have thought, based on how it looks in the pan or based on how the swatches look. But in general, I think that this is more of a fall palette for me, and so therefore that I'm going to look forward to wearing this with some of my more fall clothes, like burgundy type of clothes. But I think it's a little bit less appropriate for me for the summer months. Now, I do think that for people who have a darker skin tone, and particularly if you have a darker skin tone that has a bit of reddishness in it, then this could be a really, really nice neutral palette. And I can imagine that that could go really, really well, and that could look really attractive just for really almost any everyday occasion. But I think for me, I'm probably going to do better off if I use this more when I'm in the fall months, and that I'm wearing clothes that are a little bit on the darker side. And then the next quad is called Babylone Roses, and this is number 400. And this has 4 different colors that kind of lean a little bit purplish. And so this is, again, a color story that I'm not entirely comfortable with, but that I think actually has worked really well for me with regard to this palette. This one and the previous palette, these are 2 palettes that I didn't think that I was going to buy, but then during the Sephora sale, I went to Sephora and they had these on sale at the store, and I tried them on with my fingers, and I thought that they looked so terrific that I couldn't resist but to buy them. And that in general, I think that as this color story goes, that they do look really nice on me. The one that I used mostly on my eyes as a base is one that is sort of, again, a clay type of a rose color, but in this case it leans considerably more blue, I think, or more purple, and it's really kind of like a general mauve color, which doesn't work too badly on me. And then the one that's darker is almost like a grape juice color, and it has a little bit of a brownishness to it, but it definitely is darker, and it's definitely a bit more purple. And then this one has 2 different colors of shimmer in them, and so I tried putting one of these on each of my eyes to start out with, just to see if there was much of a difference in terms of how it looked. And in terms of how it looked in both the mirror and on the monitor, I really don't see that much of a difference when I put these 2 different colors on over the other colors. But one of them is a little bit more pink and shimmery, and then the other one is a little bit more lilac and shimmery. And I think both of those are very pretty. And that in general, that when I put this on my eyes, this has been working out much, much better than I had thought. And that I think that especially if I'm wearing clothes that would coordinate with this, I think this would be a super pretty look. Now, it certainly is the case that this does not have an eyeliner shade in here, and so I did use a darker brown neutral type of a color to coordinate with that, and I think that that worked out perfectly fine together. And so the next one is called Kasbah Spices, and this is shade 300. And this is one of the 2 that I included in my previous video on the YSL quads. And so I just put in the footage from that old video in here. And so Kasbah is another section of the town of Marrakesh, And when I looked at the pictures on the Google, it does look like a lot of the buildings in that area do look the same-ish kind of orangish, brownish type color as this darker shade in the palette. So I can see why they would have gone for this type of a look with this palette. But I do think that that orangish brown color is sort of like a darker caramel color that I think is actually one of my favorite colors for eyeshadow. So that is one that I have really enjoyed using. And then there is one that is almost the same color as my skin tone. And so I have put that on my eyes more liberally, and then I put the caramel color on top of it. And then this brown color here, I think this is a little bit too red for me to put underneath my eyes, but it's not so red as some of these other colors. So I have used this fairly liberally on top of my eyes. And I do think it's a pretty color brown, but it is a little bit on the warm side. And then there is a caramel type gold color that I think is also very pretty. So I do think that with this palette, that if I were to use a more neutral brown color for both mascara and for eyeliner, that would work really well, and that will make these shades look a little bit less reddish and a little bit more just attractive. And then the final palette that I have here is the most popular one so far from the YSL line, and this is shade number 100, and it is called Stora Dolls. And I think in general that this is very similar in terms of the color story to what Natasha Denona offered in her palette that is called I Need a Nude. So in this case it is very cool leaning browns, but almost to the point that they have, some of them have a tiny little bit of a purplish type of a color to them, but they are certainly cool and they're certainly very wearable and they're looking really modern. And so I think at the moment that kind of a color story is really in. Eyeshadows were really warm for a very long period of time, and now people are really leaning a little bit more towards the cool looks, and this is definitely giving that kind of a vibe. And there are 4 shades in here, and I think that these are all really wearable shades for me. So there are 3 shades of cool brown colors. One is a light taupe, one is a medium taupe, and then one is a darker brown. And so I can use any of those colors really on my whole eyelid, or I can use one or both of them on my eyelid, and then I can use the darker brown shade as an eyeliner, both under my eyes and on top of my eyes. And I think that they're very wearable. And then there's that one color which I have unfortunately managed to totally get messed up, but that is still perfectly usable for me, and that is a shimmery type of a color with a little tiny bit of a silvery type of a look to it. And I think that over the top of any of these colors, and I think over the top of other colors, that's also a very, very pretty color. And so again, this footage was from when I did my previous video, but I think this is a really pretty eyeshadow quad, and that most people do seem to be really happy with this color story these days. And you know, when I purchased all of the new shades, I really thought that the Over Brun shade looked like it was going to be similar to the Stora Dolls one, but it really turns out that it's not very similar at all, that the Over Brun one is much more caramel, and this one is much more decidedly cool, and so that makes a big difference. And then of the YSL quads, I know that there are 2 more possibilities that are out there that you may already have or that you may be interested in. So the first one is called shade number 910, which is Trocadero Nights. And this was a limited edition. It was in 2023. It's a really pretty palette now that I look at it. I didn't really even notice it when it first came out a year ago. But I think it is a very nice palette. I think it's almost totally gone from the market now. And then according to Trend Mood, which is on Instagram, there is going to be a palette from YSL that is called the Pastel Palette. And I think the outside of this is really interesting because it has some blue in it and the colors are really pretty on the imitation leather. But in terms of the inside of the palette, it doesn't have that blue color in there, and I'm not sure that those colors look very exciting. But on the other hand, I have had such good luck with all of the 11 palettes that I've tried so far that probably I will pick that one up, and I would be a little surprised at this point if I wasn't really excited about that one also. And then YSL also has a large palette, which is called Desert Nude. And I think that that does look really beautiful in terms of the shades, and that it might be really useful to use on an everyday basis. But it is usually $160, which seems really, really high to me. But I did see that this is going to be available during the Nordstrom sale for $100. And so I am thinking that I might take a look and see if I can find out some more information about that, and then maybe pick that up to review during that sale, because I do think it looks really pretty. So thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of the video, and please let me know if you would be interested in any of these YSL quads, or if you are, then which of them would be the most interesting to you. And in addition, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, then I hope you will go ahead and do that, because to my understanding, if I have more subscribers, then that means that YouTube will show my channel to more people, and therefore more people can learn about it. So thank you very much for doing that. And Coco and I love you very much, so thank you very much for watching. Goodbye. Thank you, baby. There's my good puppy. La ba da la la la, boom, baby.